Hello everyone, welcome to Anime No Mi, and thank you for joining us for another One Piece video. Recently, Luffy has managed to achieve the awakening of the Fruit of the Sun god Nika, otherwise known as the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika, and was then able to obtain a new transformation called Gear 5th, obtaining an enormous boost in strength, enabling him to face off against a Yonko. But there's a really good possibility that the strength that Luffy has obtained is still not going to be enough to face the future enemies that may arise in the final journey for Luffy and the Straw Hats. So it's gonna be necessary to increase or at least improve on his strength. In today's video, we're gonna talk about the possibility that Luffy can get an increase in his power or even evolve his skills so that he can awaken a new transformation, even being Gear 6th. But before we get into that, if you're new to the channel or even if you've been around for a bunch of episodes, we'd be absolutely honored if you consider leaving us a like or even subscribing and leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the video. It really helps us out and motivates us to make more content, and if you'd like to help us out in a bigger way, consider sharing the video or the channel with a friend. Well, without further ado, let's get into the video. So friends, when Luffy was little and accidentally ate the devil fruit of the sun god, he got elastic powers and thought it was just a simpler paramecia style fruit. But throughout the story, we see that this fruit still possessed some great potential not yet explored. And Luffy, due to his creativity, managed to turn what could have been a useless fruit into an incredibly powerful fruit with a great variety of techniques. But this power that he demonstrated was not really the total power that this fruit possessed. Throughout Luffy and the Straw Hat's journey, we found out about the existence of a sun god, or a character that was freeing people that had been enslaved. And during this Wano arc, his name was finally revealed, being the sun god Nika, known as a deity who freed people who had had their freedom taken away by others. We also don't know much about what or even who Nika could be, but with the awakening of Luffy's fruit during the confrontation against Kaido, we've gotten a little more about who the sun god Nika was, and we've also found out that Nika is actually the fruit Luffy owns. Through his awakening, Luffy was able to obtain the powers of this liberating deity. But Luffy doesn't know how to use the full power of his fruit because he just awakened it. So it's going to be really important that he learn to use this power of his fruit completely, or maybe even unlock a new transformation, or just get used to the idea that he now has a Zoan fruit instead of a paramecia. As said by the Gorosei, the fruit that Luffy owns is incredibly ridiculous because of the great freedom it offers the user. But it's necessary for Luffy to have great creativity to be able to use all of the potential of this fruit. Now, this is something that we know that Luffy has in a great amount because he spent most of his life using the power of this rubber fruit in many creative ways, and it was this very creativity that allowed the awakening to happen and further enhance the power of this fruit. During his battle against Kaido, we saw Luffy using a small demonstration of this power, being able to alter his body without having to blow air into it, and having an immense increase in strength and also increased power to his strikes, as well as getting a pretty good strength boost because this is, after all, a Zoan fruit. If given enough time, of course, Luffy's creativity is gonna find new techniques that would be able to face even more powerful enemies that are going to exist in the future. And there may even be a possibility that he could create a new transformation called Gear 6. Now, just to be clear, Gear 6th would be Luffy assuming the full form of the sun god Nika. Because as it's been widely speculated in the community, what Luffy had in his awakening was more or less a hybrid form. So with the full powers of the sun god Nika, Luffy would reach the level of potentially a deity just like Joy Boy did in the past. In this way, and if Luffy were able to unlock this level, he would be able to take on extremely powerful enemies, especially Teach, who is currently one of the most dangerous people in the world because he has ultimately the same goal as Luffy. And not only that, Teach also possesses a fruit that can nullify any devil fruit power. So Teach is going to become a dangerous opponent because if he gets his hands on Luffy, he can nullify his power. So Luffy's gonna need to become even stronger so that he can take on Teach and the other dangers like the Marines, the world government, and anything else that they have up their sleeve that we haven't heard about yet. So now's gonna be the time where Luffy's adventure is gonna come to its zenith and eventually end. So he needs this new power so that he could reach that same level to fulfill whatever Joy Boy left unfinished. And as also we've seen mentioned in the story, the sun god Nika was known as a deity who saved people who had been enslaved by the celestial dragons or even the Marines. And thus, through the awakening of his fruit, he managed to obtain a great freedom in his power. So let's take a quick sec to talk about some of the powers that Luffy was just able to unlock and what they could become in the future should he have a little bit of time to train. First off, Luffy was able to use certain abilities that he couldn't use in his normal rubbery form. And also his rubber body got an exceptionally good upgrade because he was able able to take and tank blows from Kaido where he'd been knocked out previously. And it wasn't just the physical attacks that Luffy got good resistance to, it was some of the other things that Kaido was able to throw at him as well. I mean, we saw Kaido used one of his most powerful techniques in his dragon form called the Boro Breath. And in this attack, Kaido releases basically like fire from his mouth and can destroy mountains. But when Kaido hit this form of Luffy's, he pretty much came out unscathed. All in all, even though he took this attack a couple of times, Luffy's body was just a little charred, demonstrating that not even one of the attacks with immensely powerful destructive capability could do much against this new transformation of Luffy's. To add on to the topic of resistance, we also saw that while in Gear 5th, Luffy managed to withstand several blows from Kaido, who was using not only his Kanabo, but also his Haki and his Conqueror's Haki. And it managed him to, although he hit Luffy and did cause, some damage, he never ever faltered. There was even a point during the fight where it looked like Kaido seemed to crush Luffy's body, but at the same moment, Luffy had managed to make his body return to normal. Demonstrating further this elasticity of his body became all the more crazy. This ability alone allowed him to return to combat regardless of the damage he suffered, because his rubber body would always just bounce back after taking a hit, and this would be something that no other pirate could really do. Now, in fairness, even though Luffy was able to take and withstand these blows, he still felt pain and became tired because of the exhausting combat and because he suffered a lot of damage to his body. So he did seem to wear out a little bit faster. Another added benefit to this awakening is that Luffy is able to inflate his entire body to a giant size, and transforming him into a way that also not only imparts the size, but also the great physical strength and weight that he would get if he really were a giant. Luffy was also able to create an entirely insane huge punch and covered it with his Haki to deliver the final blow to Kaido that he could finally defeat him. And Luffy's blow was so powerful that it was even able to defeat one of Kaido's strongest techniques. And as I said before, one really surprising benefit is that Luffy was, again, able to swell his body without the need to blow air from his mouth into his body, showing that he no longer had that limitation from, say, Gear 3rd or Gear 4th. And it also meant that he now had a greater physical freedom with this awakening. One other characteristic that was widely debated in the community, should Luffy actually awaken his power, was of course whether or not he could impart his rubbery characteristics to his environment. And of course, during the fight with Kaido, we saw that Luffy was in fact able to turn the environment around him into rubber. So much so that when we saw Kaido shoot a Boro Breath at him, Luffy was able to grab the ground below him, lift it up and stretch it up like rubber, and then bounce Kaido's attack right back at him. So with this new environmental effect, Luffy could learn how to not only reflect any kind of power back, but even destabilize an opponent through a rubber floor or changing the environment around him, or even, should he get thrown, change whatever he runs into rubber so he just bounces off rather than taking damage. So the reason this technique in this part of Luffy's power was speculated is because we've seen examples of an awakened Paramecia where they're able to cast their ability beyond themselves into their environment. And a really good example of this was Doflamingo, who was able to turn everything that he touched and his whole environment into a string world. Another interesting effect of this kind of rubbery world effect is that it seemed to impart some of that same rubber resistance to the environment. Because if you think about it, it was neither burned nor melted by Kaido's attack, even though it was bouncing it back. And although the attack had an immensely explosive power, I mean, enough to destroy a castle or a mountain, it didn't destroy this rubbery road that Luffy had just created. So again, if Luffy were able to have a little time to increase his proficiency and his creativity with this idea, we could see, even though this kind of idea has gotten a little bit of ire in the community, this kind of rubbery world bouncy house kind of idea where he can bounce around because, let's be real, in Gear 4th in Boundman, that's what he does. But this instead would turn the table on his opponents and anybody around him, and they might not even be able to stand. But in an interesting twist, we can understand that awakenings affect the environment, but Luffy's also seemed a little extra because it also seemed to be able to affect organic material. And this was shown when Kaido literally swallowed Luffy whole, but Luffy then caused his body to expand and inflate, kind of like he was made of rubber just like Luffy, in a almost cartoonish kind of Looney Tunes kind of way. And it almost seemed that although he was stretching, Kaido did feel pain and that it was really uncomfortable. And as many others have also said in our One Piece community, after Luffy's awakening, it seems like he now possesses a fruit that demonstrates Paramecia abilities, as well as it is a Zoan type devil fruit. So many of us have believed that with further awakening and training, that he would also have some Logia abilities, whether it's the intangibility or where he's able to then stretch and do that, and maybe that's kind of what we saw where Luffy was able to get out of Kaido's belly through his eyes. But so far we haven't had this ability explained very well, and it didn't even seem like Kaido was able to comment much more than just a little bit of tidbits that we got during the fight. But again, as we said, because this awakening has just occurred, we could be just on the tip of what Luffy is really capable of. And one last thing we're going to talk about before we wrap up today is that Luffy also demonstrated his ability that made his heartbeat beat to a rhythm, and it was even called the drums of liberation, and it almost seemed to allow Luffy to recover his energy pretty much instantly. But it seemed this technique also had a downside, and Kaido said that by using this technique, Luffy would gradually lose his life, which could cause him to shorten his lifespan and even have a shorter life in the future because it's gonna wear him out little by little. But of course, this isn't the first time we've heard that when Luffy jumps into a certain gear, it starts taking away some of his life. So possibly, with more training, he would be able to overcome this kind of takeaway from the power. But all in all, it just means that Luffy is still gonna have to have some time to learn the full potential of his devil fruit and acquire some new techniques that are gonna allow him to take on all these dangerous opponents that we know will appear in the future. And of course, he's gonna have to get that power that Joy Boy possessed because ultimately he does have some things that he needs to finish that Joy Boy wasn't able to so many hundreds of years ago. With all that said, my friends, I'd love to know what you think about it. What kind of new techniques do you think Luffy might come up with? And if he was have some kind of Logia ability, what do you think that would look like? And also, if Luffy was to get some time to train, do you think we would need a full time skip, or how do you think Oda might do that? Let us know what you think in the comments below. So friends, as we finish up, I want to thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end. Be sure you comment on any themes or ideas that you'd like to see in future videos. And also, since you made it this far, why don't you give us a like or hit that red subscribe button before you head out to take on the rest of your day. I really hope to see you all in our next video, and let's keep sailing this giant sea together. Take care.